So today I'd like to talk about a couple of films by Peter Jackson. Part of this came out of the fact that I'd gone to Walmart with my kids and we were just looking around, and I still go to the electronics section, and there's always bins of DVDs and Blu-rays and at a good price. And I saw The Frighteners, which was the director's version, which I own on DVD, but it was $8 and it's, it's Blu-ray, so it's going to look really good. And it's got tons of special features on this. Like, not only does it have a director's version, but the full-length documentary is amazing. And so I thought, well, I'm going to get that. And now it gives me an excuse to get on here and talk about it.
There has been a destructive force unleashed on this town such as I have never seen.
Oh my God, I don't believe this is not happening!
We have got a poltergeist!
And I want to talk about Peter Jackson. I remember, in years past as I was teaching writing and filmmaking, that when Lord of the Rings was really popular, I would always say to some of the students, I'd be like, oh yeah, you must have seen Peter Jackson's early films, like Dead Alive or Meet the Feebles. And they're like, no. And Heavenly Creatures? And they'd be like, no, I don't know. I'm like, what? And I couldn't understand it, because as a filmmaker, as a young filmmaker myself, or a young lover of movies, if I watched a movie like Lord of the Rings, first thing I'd say is, who made this movie? And then I would go and watch all of the movies that they've made, even the bad ones. Some people don't always come up with the best movie, the first go out. So you still want to go through the filmography. I'm sure people who love Star Wars eventually got to THX 1138, his first feature film, George Lucas, and went, well, that's nothing. That's nothing like Star Wars at all. You can see elements of it, but that's not Star Wars. So you might be a little disappointed that, that movie isn't Star Wars. Neither is American Graffiti. So Heavenly Creatures was one of his sort of the international debut. And I say that he had become popular before this, but this was the film that really introduced him to the mainstream international crowd, I think. And I remember when it came out, it made quite an impact. And a lot of films out of that part of the world, New Zealand and Australia, were becoming very popular. So the films of Jane Campion, like Angel at My Table, and of course in Australia, I really liked the films of John Digan at the time, which was The Year My Voice Broke and Flirting, and then followed him through Wide Sargasso Sea and things like that. So a lot of interesting filmmaking going on beyond Mad Max and other things that are obvious to that part of the world. But Heavenly Creatures was just that indie sort of boom that happened in the 90s, where lots of independent film was being made and distributed, and Miramax, of course, was a big part of that. So you got Heavenly Creatures, which was Fran Walsh and Peter Jackson's retelling of a true story.
They were two young girls living in a world of imagination.
I'm going to the fourth world. It's an absolute paradise of music, art, and pure enjoyment.
What they had was friendship.
What a disgrace you are!
Your mother is rather a miserable woman.
What they needed was freedom.
Do you like your mother?
No. I think I'm going crazy. I'm sure it's perfectly innocent.
The crime that shocked the nation.
People die every day. Only the best people fight against all obstacles in pursuit of happiness.
Paul thought it up.
Aren't you clever? We're not going to be separated. I hate you!
She's uncontrollable.
So there you have Heavenly Creatures. And what makes Heavenly Creatures really interesting is not only that it is nothing like Meet the Feebles and Dead Alive, as Peter Jackson films go.
So, you want to join the Feebles?
Oh, rather.
Meet the Feebles! Meet the Feebles!
Meet the Feebles.
Your mother ate my dog!
Dead Alive.
Party's over.
Based on a true story.
It's all frightfully romantic.
Heavenly Creatures.
It's really imaginative. There is like an undercurrent of energy in this film, this friendship that is very intense. It does turn dark, but a lot of time, so at the beginning of their friendship, it is just like two kindred spirits that come together, and these two girls are so imaginative.
But the fair senorita doesn't seem to care for the song of the earth. So I'll sing.
They create worlds together. They have a thing called the Fourth World that they create together in Borovnia, this little castle town.
Deborah!
It's so imaginative, and they go to the movies and they see The Third Man.
I have never in my life seen anything in the same category of hideousness, but I adore him.
They imagine Orson Welles as Harry Lime is chasing them around. So there's an energy in this film that is really unique, and there's a romanticism of the camera moves, or these big camera moves that are being done by Peter Jackson, which I thought were unique to this movie, but it turns out he does that. That's part of his signature. He likes the moving cameras, as we know from Lord of the Rings.
It is indeed a miracle, one must feel, that two such heavenly creatures are real. Both sets of eyes, though different far, hold many mysteries strange. Impassively, they watch the race of man decay and change.
With the ending being as dark and grim as it is, the movie doesn't play as a film that is dark. It isn't, say, Alfred Hitchcock's Rope, which is sort of similar. These two young boys who kill another boy comes out of the Leopold Loeb case in the United States. These two boys who murder another, basically for fun, I guess. These girls aren't doing it for fun, but it's that sort of world, and you could take it with the factual look of it. But they, Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh, so I look at them as characters, these young characters who really are naive, and this friendship just becomes so intense that they end up doing something that's unthinkable.
That's Mummy! She's terribly hurt! Please!
And by the way, this movie has a lot of early digital cinema starting here. The birth of Weta, which would become the special effects company that would do all the Lord of the Rings and things like that. So you have very early CGI technology being played with. And that brings you sort of to the Frighteners, because while they're working on this movie, they started working on the idea for the Frighteners. And the Frighteners, of course, starring Michael J. Fox, they got meetings with Robert Zemeckis, who really liked what they were doing and decided to produce the Frighteners. And Zemeckis sort of makes sense to some degree. In that time, of course, he was starting, I think, probably go into Forrest Gump and more of his sort of serious films that he was trying to make. But previous to that, it was like Back to the Future and Roger Rabbit and all these sort of fun, humorous, special effects driven stories. So the Frighteners sort of interested him as a producer to produce this with Peter Jackson and Fran Walsh. And you get this really quirky, strange, film that I think Peter Jackson refers to Michael J. Fox's character as a psychic con man. He's friends with these ghosts. His personal life's in the terrible situation. His wife has died, and he's hanging out with these ghosts. But he uses the ghosts to really extort money out of people. So they play pranks, basically, on certain suckers. Ghosts do all sorts of stuff, and then he charges money to get rid of them.
Okay, well, folks, I can do a clearance, but it's not going to be cheap. Although I do offer a 6-month guarantee.
That fellow takes us totally for granted.
Hey, Stewart, in or out, huh?
Frank Bannister had a remarkable ability
Psychic investigator?
to communicate with the dead.
You could see spirits?
Emanations are normally confined to the cemetery.
You cannot push spirits around!
So it's sort of like a very funny premise, and one that works well for that horror comedy genre. So it's sort of, I guess there's a bit of a Ghostbusters-y sort of element to it, but not really. At the beginning of the film, this apparition, this demonic character, almost like the Grim Reaper, shows up.
But now, some things put the fear of death in the living
What is happening to me?
and sent the dead running for their lives.
I've seen a figure in a cape.
That was the soul collector. When your number's up, that's it.
Frank, we got problems. All these murders that have been going on in Fairwater, they're gonna pin them on you.
This is where Weta comes out of, sort of the Frighteners, and begins in Heavenly Creatures, of these digital effects companies. And of course, comes to total fruition in Lord of the Rings.
You don't have any friends. Nobody likes you.
But The Frighteners is one of those films that really pioneers that technology and pushes it. And at times could look a little dated, could look like early CG or compositing, but it's still fun, And what I like about the movie as well, when I left the theater seeing it, I thought, well, it's such a weird sense of humor to it. It's a bit bizarre, a little oddball.
You're next, pal. Take him out, baby.
And that makes me start to think about international films that are sort of American made, and this bring you to the idea of the Ghostbusters.
Ghostbusters.
Hey, anybody see a ghost?
They catch the ghost that won't stay dead.
Canadians have been very good at that. We've infiltrated the United States because it's hard to make it in Canada. America is such it's a huge industry, right? So a lot of our talent ends up going into the U.S. and sometimes things appear there that are just a little bit off what Americans would normally make. And I think The Frighteners was like that for me as well, because it comes out of New Zealand and it was shot in New Zealand, but it sort of pretending to be an American movie. But it's not an American movie. It's a New Zealander movie made by Peter Jackson. So it has a different tonality to it.
What the hell are you doing in my graveyard? You have been told to stay away! Sound off like you've got up here!
Yeah, well, it's a public place, Hiles.
I do not like you! You cannot bring your spooks in here without my permission! Disappear, scumbag!
What I really like about Peter Jackson is, and all filmmakers, is when you start to really see their obsessions come out, that they're not just making stuff for no reason. So when you look at Peter Jackson and Heavenly Creatures, these two young teenage gals who murder the mom, to a film like Frighteners, where again you have teenage murderers who are on a killing spree, and then over to the west of Memphis, he produced a documentary on the Memphis 3.
This case is nothing out of the ordinary. You're dealing with 3 kids, bottom of the barrel, poor white trash.
Here's the state of Arkansas refusing to let the truth shine on this case.
My role when I was brought in was primarily to analyze the case, to see, does it really fit the 3 people they have in prison?
They are seeking merely the opportunity to have the fair trial they have never had.
And the reason I'm hesitating, I'm trying to think if that's a question that I should be answering.
So it's good to see, a filmmaker whose sort of obsessions come through, and you see them. I think with George Lucas, the Star Wars came out of some sort of obsession with, maybe you'd say, Buck Rogers or whatever, But really, you know, he did have a theme in his films early on, like THX 1138 and his student film Electronic Labyrinth, that had to do with the loss of freedom, the fighting for freedom. There's something in there, the evil empire, you know, which is both of his, it's not only his student work, but his first feature film have to deal with that as well. So it's Star Wars, as entertaining as it is actually coming out of some sort of little place of obsession. But, you know, it's just interesting to see filmmakers who sort of these little obsessions that come through. I was thinking with Coppola, there is something about like old age and loneliness that goes on, and you see that in Youth Without Youth.
He's a young man in the prime of his life.
I have to think, 10 months ago, you turned 74 years old.
Of course, the fall of Michael Corleone and The Godfather. So aging and things like that would be interesting to explore with his work, and loneliness. And maybe that comes out of, you know, the fact that he had polio as a kid. Who knows? You know, it's very interesting to see where you're drawn as an artist or a storyteller. So I'm going to leave you with that. Frighteners is a great, fun little movie to watch. Good, Halloween's coming up, so it'll be fun. I bought Candyman at the same time. Yes, I bought Candyman. I'm going to do a thing on Clive Barker, and I'm going to do another video on it's actually Clive Barker and Michael Crichton. These are novelists who became filmmakers. So I'm interested in that. So we'll be looking at that video shortly, and have a great day. Don't forget to subscribe.